Ladies and gentlemen, we are back for another glorious edition of Ask That. My name is Clark Sell, your hostess with the mostest. Today, we're going to talk about open source and getting involved in open source. And with me, I have Jack Koppa. Jack, how are you, sir?
I'm excellent. How about yourself?
I am doing fantastic. I am looking forward to this conversation. It is something near and dear to me. I was talking the other day with somebody about how if our industry did not have things like open source or a community or just the overwhelming amount of people helping one another in this, that we actually have an industry that's kind of pointless. And not to say that we're not doing great things, but imagine where we only have big kind of manufacturers, the Microsofts and Googles of the world, and nothing that surrounds them or each other to really push that ball forward. And so I'm looking forward to having this conversation. But before we get there, can you tell everybody who you are?
I think I can. Hi, I'm Jack. I'm a front-end developer with SafeNet Consulting in Milwaukee, and I really lucked into / stumbled into that role. I graduated from college in 2016 with environmental studies in Chinese, which is a little bit removed from software. But I had done web development throughout, and the reason I get really excited about open source things is because that was sort of my avenue into software when you're not at least getting paid significant amounts of money to work on web or software projects. It was really cool to have projects available, ways to develop skills and ways to start interacting with communities. That led me in some ways to live in China for a bit, did stuff in LA, and then moved back here and lucked into SafeNet. And open source is still something that I'm really excited about, so I'm looking forward to talking about it.
So the first question, and if I did not ask this, it would be completely wrong. How the hell does somebody get into, did you say environmental sciences in Chinese?
Yes.
That seems like, you were wandering around campus and looking for a degree and stepped into the wrong room and couldn't get out.
Yeah, or dartboard, right?
Yeah.
Someone put it up there, and it was a really wide-ranging dartboard.
Yeah, most people pick like accounting and how environmental sciences.
Yeah, just something. The environment was the easy part. That's something I've always been passionate about. The typical potential millennial concerns of climate change and air pollution and things like that. Chinese was because I did want to take another language, and I was interested and really excited about the potential of all the environmental issues that China's having. Because even when I was getting started in school, they were starting to make improvements just because it was so urgent for them. And so those two actually went together pretty easily. It informed a lot of the projects and, personal things that I've worked on. The web portion was actually more random, which was just like take an elective web design development class, really love it, keep doing it. People start paying you to do WordPress things, and it's like, I like this. This is super enjoyable. And so you go from there.
Yeah, that's it's definitely stitching together some things. I mean, I'll take a programming elective. Yeah, sure. That seems to fit.
Why not? Yeah, it's current year. Might as well take a programming elective.
So then, so bouncing around the world, how then did you get started in open source?
So initially, WordPress was a big one, because that was what I was working on when I had first, small contract freelance clients, while I was at school. And then with nonprofits in LA, there was a really cool nonprofit. The first time it was like, wow, I can do all three of these things, was a, clean technology nonprofit in LA who also had an office in Beijing. They were working on sharing clean tech ideas between China and the US. They needed a website.
Jackpot there, boy. Let me tell you.
Right. That was all three. That was it.
Yeah.
And from there, I've just been chasing that high ever since. They needed website work done. We worked on a WordPress site for them, and as I was, doing that for that client, and then also another department at school, you start to find out just how supportive people are of trying to figure out solutions in WordPress, whether they're developing free plugins or there was someone that I interacted with who was actively contributing to WordPress core, which was really cool. And just that idea of, wow, like this person understands this thing that I just used the outside of. I just used the end result of, but they know, understand, and have contributed to the way that this actually works. That too was an exciting thing that I looked forward to eventually having the skill to contribute to in the future.
Okay, so I want to stop you there. So
yeah.
Eventually having the skill that you can contribute to, like
I
feel like that's a very very big wall that needs to get broken down, because I feel like contributing means a lot of different things to a lot of different areas of open source. And I don't feel like skill is necessarily a you can do once you get here.
Yeah. And that's an excellent point. And thank you for calling me out on that. The thing that I discovered then and over time is that pretty much every project will have a absolute beginner way to contribute, which is awesome. And
what does that mean? Like, what is the beginner? Is this documentation? Is this them being mindful of like, hey, I realize, hey, you could do this, or what does that really look like?
It's seeking out, if it's GitHub where most of these projects that you'll be looking at are hosted, it's seeking out like good first time issues, by label. A lot of those do end up being documentation, but it's really, I think, just a mindset from the beginning is that if I discover an issue, in software that I'm using, a lot of times our reaction is, why isn't this working? This should just work. This is frustrating that this doesn't work. But the whole benefit of it being open source is that just by understanding that this isn't working the way it's supposed to and having some knowledge of what's useful to developers and eventually program managers and project managers, is that I can write up a useful bug report. And that is super beneficial and one of the primary reasons that companies find benefits in open sourcing their projects is that people like us, if we just pay attention to when things go wrong or when people are encountering the same issues, you raise an issue in the repo on GitHub, you post on Stack Overflow, you work on your own to try to find the solution, and you work towards an answer and hopefully provide that to the community. So I will never, I shouldn't say never, we shouldn't say never, but it's unlikely that I'll ever be contributing to V8, right, for Node. That's a level of performance optimization that I both won't likely get to and also am not super interested in because it's not the type of projects that I work on. But if I discover a Node bug, like I know where I can go and try to log that and at least contribute to a discussion and help people try to track down where this could be worked on. And then more importantly, in the projects that I'm using and understanding every day, then you can start super small. Just I saw this thing is wrong. I saw this typo even on the documentation, and you from there. So you're totally right that you can contribute immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some that I've given, just was in the cross, just happened to be a time and context, right? Used a thing, a version came out, went to use it, didn't seem to work, filed a bug, only to get the response back was, holy crap, we just missed it. It's totally fixed. 15 minutes later, things rolled out. And again, it's seemingly innocent at times. And, it didn't take any time for me to do that either.
Yeah, certainly.
So getting back to where you started. So getting involved, where do we go?
So from WordPress, we take a quick hop over the Pacific Ocean to living in Shanghai for a bit. And my favorite thing there is that they have a pretty vibrant expat community. And a lot of those people, because of the environmental concerns that are, when you have to wear a mask to walk around, you're pretty aware of environmental concerns. So they have both a vibrant community of people interested in environmental issues and then also a large number of both startups and larger companies that are working on air quality, air pollution, water pollution, different environmental issues there. And that led eventually to my favorite open source community, which is called OpenAQ. They are an air quality organization that collects and logs research and government grade air quality data every day, hourly from around the world. I think they have about 8,400 locations right now that they're regularly collecting data from. And then they have fetch implementations to grab it, whether they have to scrape or hook into someone else's API, collect it in their own databases, and set up a really accessible API to either get the latest data, get all data for a location, get historical things, get what parameters they track. And then that organization has also created, visualizations for that, as well as supported tons of community projects. So that one has been super vibrant, and it got started because I was working with these people in companies who were using and interacting with that data. And so I think that was a super cool pathway if you stay open to those kind of opportunities. Like, where are the people that I admire or work with? What communities are they involved in? And stay open to, maybe I could find a place here. And so that was great.
So what does your involvement look like?
The primary contributing that I do is to the front-end website, which is a React website. It's openaq.org. And so there's graphs and charting and improvements that can be made in, how this is set up and what the community page is, and working through the issues that either I found or that people have raised.
Sure. So are you just, is it a pretty coordinated effort? I mean, or is there kind of a virtual team behind the scenes that's working on this, or you pretty much asynchronous, just picking stuff off the issue log?
Yeah, I would say more asynchronous with 2 or 3 they have, the organization is lucky in that they have, I think it's just 1 full-time employee right now and maybe 2 part-time employees. But then one guy is Joe, who has been with the organization from the beginning and helped get some of it up and running, and he's sort of in charge of organizing backlogs, marking which issues are good for contribution, and then there's a lot of discussion that takes place in a Slack for which things are urgent to be worked on, what's the status of current issues.
Just kind of a public Slack channel that's for the whole effort in itself?
Yeah. If anything that I'm saying is interesting to you, that's probably the one link I'd love to get in the show notes, because
we'll throw it on.
That's a great community to join. Whether you have questions or just want to introduce yourself or, follow along with, because the open source aspect extends into real world examples where they host workshops, for example, using their data. So there's one coming up in Nairobi, I believe, relatively soon. And so those kind of things where you can contribute material so that other people can join the community and find uses for this data.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think if anybody's to take anything away from our conversation today, it's really encouragement of getting involved in something they're passionate about, right? And finding, if that's in open source or if that's, helping, whatever, in your community. There's a multitude of ways to do that, and we're just kind of highlighting some of your path in that. Because it's easy to throw stuff out. We all have, not every open source effort has some kind of financial store behind it, if you will. I don't mean store in terms of a retail shop. I mean, financial model that is contributed to somebody having a full-time resource that's, grooming it, if you will. I think that's something that needs to get fixed. The worst thing is when something of value then falls off because somebody has a day job or has a kid or whatever, priorities change and the thing just sits out there, and it's easy to fall back and say, well, it's open source. Anybody can contribute. Yeah. But
who's going to actually do it?
That's right. Yeah. And let's be mindful of that. One of the things that has intrigued me too is we are in this global world, right? It's easy to work with anybody from any other country. Time zone is kind of the biggest problem. I guess language too. But how do you feel like, having lived in Shanghai and here, how was the community different? Is there something that we could be bringing back here? Is there something we should be mindful of when working with others abroad? And what is it? How different is it really?
Yeah, I think one one example which was really cool is just by virtue of having by virtue of being in an international city, which the Chinese population there is obviously exploding and growing into a ton of technical expertise, whether it's AI or just general startup atmosphere is super cool. But the people there who are an expat community, and I would say I interacted kind of half and half with people, they're used to thinking internationally about what resources and people exist that might be interested in the same stuff that they're interested in.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I would say that's more of a
core tenet of their
thinking. Yeah, a framing, a frame of mind, if you will. And
yet that's not because of resources, right? I mean, no. We're certainly outpopulated by Asia.
Yeah. And so it's more that if you have that as a frame of reference, that then there was an event there. They called it I think a climathon. It was a 2-day hackathon, but focused on the climate and solutions or potential solutions that would help in cities. And that's something that could certainly happen here, but it had an event in Shanghai, and then it was also happening all over the world. And so when we were there participating in this, we were Skyped into the London session, for example, or I forget if we Skyped into someone in Iceland as well, but just discussing like, what have you worked on? What have people talked about at your location? What is the issue that people are interested in there? And I think those kind of events happen when you have a community that's thinking internationally. And I think we have a lot of, from a Milwaukee specific perspective, but Wisconsin generally, I think we have a lot of companies that think they need to think super internationally. And so lots of people may have that, may even be involved with that in their day jobs, whether it's offshore developers or just products that ship to other countries.
Sure.
But then the encouragement is to think internationally in terms of also what you do in your free time, or, we were talking about financial models, when you can open source something that's at your company, how that works on a global scale and how you can interact with people globally. I think taking that from, if you're doing it at work, taking it from work to your personal life. If you're not doing it, just find areas where that's relevant.
How do you, I love the bit of inclusion, kind of international inclusion. So if inclusion is color and gender and whatever, so should yet, location be. And how mindful do you think that organization was in trying to get London involved? I mean, I guess from one scenario, it seems obvious given climate that, the more you can do globally, right, the better your thing is, which, let's say throw out NPM module, not necessarily like, I really care about, globally, but in fact we should. So how mindful do you think that organization really is in trying to get like that event all on the same day? Was somebody grinding away and trying to make that happen globally?
Yeah, that one was actually hosted through a separate organization, and I haven't been terribly involved with them after that. So I'll just speak to, although it was, very obvious that the global aspect was the kind of the starting block from the beginning for that event, because the whole idea was to get as many cities as involved in talking to each other as possible about these kind of climate solutions.
But not easy, right? I mean, you have to have people in those places, and somebody has to coordinate all that. So it's easy to say like, well, let's just get a whole bunch of people, but it's not.
How is it going to stick? You need someone, on the ground to help make it stick. Yeah.
Right.
And that, at best, I can say that's a gradual thing, to find those connections in the same way that we talk about connections in anything else. But whether that's starting with, I as an organization or as a person have this interest, I can find another organization or person with that interest. I think that's a good place to start. It's just, the general research of who shares these interests and where. In the case of, back to OpenAQ, because that's all I can talk about. they having these workshops in India and now in Nairobi, because a big focus for them is they call it air inequality. So where like developing countries have less resources but worse air. Developed countries have more resources and better air. So there's that gap that you try to fill. They've been super good about finding people who are interested in the community, finding it maybe through Reddit, maybe through GitHub, maybe through Twitter or Medium, and using those people to find footholds into the actual communities that they're interested in and spread through workshops there. Obviously the end goal of all of this would be if you make air quality data available to more people, hopefully you impact policy decisions in more places. Sure. And so that's kind of how they work, is you start with someone who has expressed interest and you spread out through there. But you're totally right that it's not always easy on that scale.
I mean, I love the bit of being mindful, and I have learned so much from just interacting with other cultures. I worked for a European company at one point, and there's a lot to be learned. I think we all have a lot to learn from one another in how we do things, and it's not just like a left to right language or whatever. Yeah. I think there's how the culture then breeds success, how the succession planning happens, how communities are formed, the goods and bads of all of that. And we are in this global economy. I mean, and in some places it's shit, and in other places it's great. And take the governments out, I think we the people have to figure out how we learn from one another. And again, we started this whole thing like, if community didn't exist, if open source didn't exist in tech, like what would it really look like? And then you can flip it the other way and say, if as a globe we work together really well, what could we then accomplish? And I think this is a good instantiation of like, hey, let's fix air quality around the globe, not just here.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the, when we talk about open source generally and why it's been really, it's been a big part of my development as a developer, but why I think it can be a really great thing for anyone to foray into. One is just skill development, but what you just mentioned is a soft skill development, really, and a super useful one if you can take the time to learn how take the good from other cultures, learn how communication works and doesn't work, synthesize that into what works and doesn't work for you. So, you're obviously getting lots of wonderful hard skills when you're working on open source projects, but almost anything at scale now that's open source, because technology is used everywhere, is going to have developers and contributors from everywhere. So that's the intrinsic benefit, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and really, probably said more than we realize. We tend to call things open source when really open effort might be a better thing. The source part of the effort is really just the kind of mechanics of the effort itself. And, easy to think of an NPM module as, hey, this is the tool that does it. But we probably should always step back and say, what really are we trying to solve with either something as simple as, some library to, like you're talking about, solving, air quality across the globe.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's a cool process.
Yeah. So how do you balance your time? Like, what does Jack's time look like in contributing, and how do you feel like you've actually contributed and been productive while kind of, I don't want to say pushing the ball forward, but moving the effort forward?
Yeah, and there's certainly the opening thing I'd say is that there's a nice we only have so much time, and a lot of that time is spent at work, and a lot of the remaining time it's nice to do fun things or family things or the way that you want to spend it. I've noticed lots of developers, for example, take up something like woodworking as a hobby because they want to stay as far away from things that are like intangible in the ether as possible. So the reason I've been happy with how I've been able to contribute to things is because it's still code, and it's still beneficial as a career or skill advancement, but it's something that I'm passionate about. So
sure.
We'll say an average week obviously is 40 hours at work, ideally.
That's the goal.
And then, yeah, ideally. But my ideal week would be then 5 to 10 hours on projects that I'm passionate about, and one that I just finished up, which was with OpenAQ Data, was like a simple mobile app that is kind of like a weather app for air quality, where you can search a city and see the data for that city. And that was neat because spending time on it was also, transferring over to, it was an Angular thing, so it was transferring over to skills at work. And then spending time on it was also encouraging me to interact with people in that community, find out what they thought worked or what could be improved on. And so that, I think, as much as possible, if you think of it as hobby time because it's something, because you can find something that you're actually excited about or a community that you care about, then if that can be slotted into hobby time,
yeah,
that still leaves time for, the remaining free time is just family or personal,
sure,
or things like that.
How do you manage release schedules and like expectations amongst people? Because things happen, right? I mean,
yeah,
people get sick or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you go about managing realistic, I can kind of do this, you can count on me, versus becoming a Herculean, like I got to spend 40 hours this weekend because the last 3 weeks sucked.
Yeah. I would say that's a little bit of the scaling question that you run into with open source all the time, which is that in order for something like Angular or React or even VS Code to work, I think that has to be supported by a company, unfortunately, which, I shouldn't say that definitively, because Webpack and Babel, I'm all JavaScript. Webpack, Babel are also fully open source, huge, and weren't initially supported by a company, but they both, in order to exist now, they both need companies.
Right, you have to be.
Yeah, you need monetary investment there, because when someone, if I, not saying that I would do this, but if I get sick or just sick of working on a project, if there's no monetary commitment, then I or someone else will likely, disappear.
Right. Yep.
So at a certain scale, I think you need company support, which is cool because we still have lots of incentives that are aligned for companies to contribute to open source projects, where they get the publicity and they get, like we were talking about at the beginning, they get the bug support. They get, lots of testers and a community that, maybe potential customers.
And arguably, to be said, I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to grow. I think we as a community have to figure out how to better support open source and conferences and efforts and events and, all of that. Because when people's time changes and their commitments change, all the work that's been put in that should not die.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe that's a potential area, given the Wisconsin, at least, aspect of that conference. I think that's a potential area of improvement here. In particular, at least from the little that I've seen, Milwaukee is, a big .NET, Microsoft place, and it's often some of the smaller agencies that are working more in open source stacks. And so that obviously lends itself to the expectation of we'll pay for this and it should just work. And so, it's a separate thing that we don't contribute to. Whereas if you're working in open source stacks, you get more in that mindset of how can I contribute? And so .NET Core should obviously help a lot with that, or is probably starting to help a lot with that. But I totally agree is that if there's an area of improvement that, people and their organizations could take away from that, it's exactly that often these things are worth contributing to for a company and will only work when a company can contribute.
Yeah. And just to be concrete about it, contributing means money or marketing or resources or bug reports. Like there's a lot of ways one can contribute, but not contributing is not good either.
Yeah, exactly. Contributing resources or time or just making it known to your developers that this is something that we support. So if you want to spend the time to report this bug and maybe investigate the source code for this bug that we're found in Angular, like that's something that we support. Even just saying that is a great first step. Yeah,
I mean, you can take that a step further. I think, companies need to, I don't know how prevalent it is now, but it was certainly this way, 5-10 years ago, where you as an employee of said company weren't even allowed to contribute or say or log bug because of fear of ramifications back to said employee because of, you work for me and your employee agreement and this, that, and the other. And so I think our corporations of the world need to also be mindful of to give people that rope that they can contribute and it's okay, and that if there is some wall or legal protection or whatever that needs to be in place, I think it's their job as a corporation to make that known and educate their employees such that they can contribute and know where it's okay to contribute.
Yeah. If I could go really quickly millennial once more on this and talk about me again.
Please. Please, we need that.
More. The world really needs us to talk more about ourselves, I think is what it boils down to. The other way that I've just recently seen this work at a company level and an individual level is that at SafeNet, working there, as consultants, it's great, but you often come across being a consultant is really great. You work with some awesome people, but you often come across the scenario of where do I fit in terms of self-improvement, because, the client I'm at doesn't see me as their responsibility, and then the consulting company almost never sees how I'm actually working. So we wanted, and then we wanted some kind of tool to handle that scenario of how do we give and request kind of this informal feedback just to know how am I doing and what can I improve on. There's lots of solutions that exist, but they're all kind of expensive for what we need, basically like Slack prices. And so I thought we could do this basically with a Slack app and a Slack app because we're always in there already, and just host a simple function and data persistence on Azure. And people were on board with that. But the one thing that I really wanted to encourage from the beginning is this is a tool for us that will be beneficial, but could be beneficial for other people in the future. And we get no benefit really from doing this and making it private for us. It's just to make a tool that's useful for us. Other people might benefit from it. And there's, it's cool to get a public profile out there on GitHub. Yep. So we open sourced the development of that. We started it as a hackathon, and then we've been continuing. So you can give shout outs and receive and view shout outs in Slack, and we're adding features, and it's out there in the open. And right now I see no reason for people to contribute because it's so minimal in terms of its features. Mm-hmm. But if we can get it to a point where it's useful, I think it might be usable in other companies. And then, then it's already out there. People can see our direction. We've figured out how to organize milestones and stuff on there. So that's another, I think, approach that you can take in addition to contributing what's already out there. If you just think to yourself, do I really get any benefit from keeping this closed up? If the answer is no, which I really think it often is, then that's an additional approach.
Yeah, my company, we're working with a few companies where that conversation has been had more times than not, where we're being considered to build a thing that will help that company, but the reality is it's not their core competency. And so the kind of go-to-market is one of how can we build this in such a way that it can not just necessarily be open source, but even open revenue, such that the people who participate in it can then fuel back the development of it, and it then grows. And it's not your core competency. It's something that you need. It's like the tax of having to do, and you'll become better and others will become better. But if you raise a tide that lifts all boats, then, great. You can focus on your core business and this will all work. And that's, in the case of what we're doing, it's some pretty far out there thinking, we're talking about building a product that essentially is going to go open source, open model, open revenue. And that's crazy. It's not something you would have said 10 years ago.
No, it definitely just from the perspective of how do economics work, it sounds crazy. And it's really cool when people can find ways to make that work.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. At the end of every one of these, I love to acknowledge the other person. And with that being said, I think it's time to acknowledge the millennials in the room because there are none other. You make me feel old. But I do I want to thank you for being here. And more importantly, I want to thank you for sharing in the open source community and being part of that. I think this conversation needs to happen more. I also think that we need to kind of stop the millennial wall that seems to be up. I know we've joked around about it today, but the reality is that wall does exist and it's stupid. So thank you for your time in open source. Thank you for your time being actively involved in community and sharing here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So my last question, and it's a question I ask of everybody, and you are in fact no different. What or how do you define community, and what does it mean to you?
I think it's really relevant to the conversation we just had. But I think probably the most important aspect is people who are willing to share and help each other just by virtue of some shared connection rather than personal gain, specifically rather than personal economic gain. So where a group of people come together and say that we agree on or share this concept or feel this thing is valuable, and because of that I am invested in helping you grow because I feel that'll help all of us grow. Like you said, I think it's a group of people who believe that a rising tide lifts all boats.
I love that. Well, sir, and everybody watching, thank you for your time today. This has been another glorious edition of Ask That. Jack, where can people find you?
Twitter and GitHub, probably. I'm sure we'll add some links, but I'd love especially if you find me on GitHub and we can chat about open source things.
And just as a closer, why don't you tell everybody the organization, and we'll also put links below, but give a quick 1 minute blurb of the organization that you participate with.
Yeah, OpenAQ is a open source organization focused on collecting and sharing air quality data. They do some really cool stuff both in the technological world of making this accessible for research and communities, and then also in the real world of sharing workshops and events to help people understand how does air quality relate to them, and how does air quality relate to just kind of global inequality, and how can we improve it. And they make it really easy for people to contribute and work on their own projects, like I've done a little bit, and they are super friendly, so check out their Slack. It's open, just introduce yourself and you'll get lots of, I believe the trend right now is a waving bear GIF, so you'll probably see a waving bear GIF when you introduce yourself.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. And for everybody who's watching, and I know that we're starting to have an international audience, we are always looking for people to be part of Ask That. And so my ask of you is, if you're interested, reach out, because I'd love to tell your story as well. We talked a lot about the kind of global open source, global world, and I'd like to see that represented here as well. Jack, thank you for the time today.
Thank you so much, Clark. It's been a pleasure.
It has been, and we will see everybody next time.